And the role of the United States in the Western civilization is similar to the role of Rome in ancient history. China is the new Carthage. And if we look upon the history of Rome, Rome conducted many wars, but Rome invented this rule, divide et impera. Rome never conducted wars to eliminate and destroy other kingdoms, rather to conquer and to control. But there was one exception, starting with this Cato's saying, Cato the Elder, Ceterum censor Carthaginam delendam esse. And this delendam is a root of English word delete. And the war of Rome against Carthage was to delete Carthage from the very beginning. And the historians say that it was, in Western history, it was the very first genocide.
This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation. Hi guys, my name is Marek Kądzielska and this is Common Sense Generation. Today we talk about geopolitics and this clash of civilization between US and China. China is the main topic. It seems everyone is interested in this huge country, huge civilization, Chunghua. With me is Marek Kądzielski, philosopher, lawyer, sworn translator. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me to your program and having this opportunity to talk to you.
I think that since this great geopolitical awakening of Graham Allison, which happened with his publication of his book, The Tukidides Trap, creating this picture of inevitable conflict between US and China, that the sight or the eyes of all American experts look in China. And I think there's something which unites Republicans and Democrats in US. They all have a similar approach to the foreign policy and this risk of the Chinese risk. It is happening. It is happening on economic level, but it's happening also on the military level, because as far as we know, the Chinese Sea is of course still ruled by the American fleet, and this is also something which provides the free trade. But this is all the time challenged by Chinese claims of having more and more territory around the Chinese coast. Where does it actually take us? Is it going to be a huge war between those two huge powers?
It is unfortunately very likely, and we should start off from this observation from Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore. And we have this in another Allison's book dedicated to this very person and his
just to
understanding.
Interrupt you, I'm sorry, but Lee Kuan Yew actually, in my theory, in my observation, was the one who woke up Graham Allison from his geopolitical dream, because he was the one who pointed this in an interview which Graham Allison made with Lee Kuan Yew.
He was a very much extraordinary mind, but what he claims is that the question of China, the problem of China, is not that this is the next great power on the political theater in the world, but that this is the greatest power that has ever existed in history. So in this way, Lee Kuan Yew started to draw the attention of the United States, because he definitely refers to the United States very often, that the United States will have to elaborate some attitude towards China. And I think that with this emerge of this rebirth of Chinese civilization, this is something very fascinating, because from our perspective, it's something like the ancient Egypt would suddenly awaken and declare that he is the most powerful country in the West, started using the hieroglyphs. So this is fascinating. But on the other hand, this is simply a natural process. They are so powerful, they started to develop so rapidly and dynamically, that they simply emanate their power all around them. And it's not the economic or military conflict. It's definitely the clash of civilizations.
Paradoxically, US created this huge power through the policy
yes,
of
they
Henry
made it
Kissinger.
possible. They say that we have fed this monster.
Henry Kissinger fed this monster firsthand.
Absolutely. It was his step against the Soviet Union.
Creating the Chi-America.
Chi-America is an economic concept because definitely economic relations between China and the United States are so deep and they cannot be easily broken. But the thing is that China is simply a completely different civilization, and I would say it is a complete one. It needs nothing from the West. They have their own history, their own language, medicine, philosophy, and now they have their own army, economy, and currency. That everything is better and different than the Western one.
They were actually the one who invented paper money.
But now they are investing in gold, and they are very reasonable.
Very much.
And their perspective is completely different. When Professor Guralczyk, one of the leading Polish experts on China, highlighted this, that whenever he visits his friends, professors in China, they ask him a question, so what are your grandchildren going to do? Because this is their perspective. The historical perspective of China is completely different. They plan on the very long term.
Just to say this, the Americans are not
rush.
asking this question, but because they are not having grandchildren.
Absolutely, yes. But also because their social system is different. They don't have these great families. They don't care for their grandparents. They leave them in an institution. So everything is completely different. And the thing is that the world cannot operate the American way and the Chinese way at the same time. And the problem is, one of the problems is, of course, highlighted by this, in his book by Ellison, The Stint for War. It never happened in the history of the human conflicts that two powers didn't clash. They always did in the military terms. But there is something much more in terms of China. First, because of their size and power, because they are so powerful that, in my opinion, China has this unique opportunity to be not only the superpower, but to be the hyperpower. So to take over control on the entire globe in the meaning of the heartland and rimland and island, but also in cybersphere, in outer space. And they will definitely spread their social and political system whenever they enter.
But on the other hand, they're very difficult to conquer. You conquer the harbors, of course, but to control the whole China with its territory, mostly with a lot of very small mountains, it's extremely difficult to form any battles, to have any military area there. Because it's almost impossible to take mountain after mountain, village after the village. So you can be military, you can
so
control
you're prompting
only
us
the coast.
that if there will be a war, that will be a completely different war. And this is something that was somehow predicted. So we had a warning from Stanisław Lem, one of the most outstanding minds in the 20th century. And in his late essays, which are strictly geopolitical, there is one very important that is referred to as sex wars, and it has nothing to do with
sex.
With sex, with genders, but Lem says that in the past there were states fighting against each other, but in the nearest future it will be the entire populations fighting against each other, because there is too little space on the planet Earth for those populations to coexist. And he is warning, but on the other hand, he predicts that sooner or later the West will attempt to sterilize the entire Asian continent. He is almost openly saying this, and he suggests that it might be achieved by poisoning the waters, or by spreading a kind of virus, or by using traditional but unconventional weapons like the A-bombs. So this is very frustrating, and he was very much criticized from Archbishop Rzeczyński, who was criticizing him from the position of the church, and who was also professor in physics, and a very intelligent person. But Len replied that he is not urging and he's not suggesting that it should happen. He's simply warning that he, as a reasonable person, predicts that this is very likely, unfortunately, that the events may come in this way. So
definitely
goes hand in hand with the clash of civilization, with Allison.
Definitely the experience of living in such a huge mass, and the masses which people experience in Asia, in China, in India, is a totally different structure of a society than we have in the Western world. We do not face such problems with space,
they
organizing
are
of
extremely well
society.
organized, and they are producing better and better conditions.
Because they are so much afraid of chaos. Because
Yes.
living in such a huge society is a trigger to create chaos. Chinese people even have a saying of this chaos. It's Nuan.
But also, in the case of China, surprisingly, the United States missed something, because we can see some discussions pending in think tanks in America, something like 15 years ago, when they discussed India as the first possible opponent on the global scale, not China. So they obviously missed something, and it didn't happen yesterday. It's rooted in the miscalculations in the past. So they did not predict. And openly speaking, coming to Stanisław Lem again, he's so much important and fascinating because he's the only author dealing with futurology whose futurological papers predicted the future. And all other papers that people wrote in the past in futurology, including Sovietology, they would try to predict the collapse of the Soviet Union and the future of the socialist system. They all failed. But only the papers from Stanisław Lem predict the future. He predicted so many, not only inventions, but applications of those inventions.
That he should be treated seriously.
He must be treated seriously. So when he warns about the sex wars, we should treat it seriously. And if I look upon what is happening with China, if we take seriously this metaphor, and the metaphor is important because, as Henryk Greniewski, one of the leading Polish logicians, said, the metaphor is another expression of this relation in logic that is so important, isomorphism, that implies that not the phenomena are identical, but the relations between them are identical. But if we take seriously this metaphor by Bender, who says that the United States is a contemporary Rome, so obviously if we put this perspective, and the role of the United States in the Western civilization is similar to the role of Rome in ancient history, China is the new Carthage. And if we look upon the history of Rome, Rome conducted many wars, but Rome invented this rule, divide et impera. Rome never conducted wars to eliminate and destroy other kingdoms, rather to conquer and to control. But there was one exception, starting with this Cato's saying, Cato the Elder, Ceterum censor Carthaginam delendam esse. And this delendam is a root of English word delete. And the war of Rome against Carthage was to delete Carthage, from the very beginning. And the historians say that it was, in Western history, it was the very first genocide. Because in one day, in the ancient world that was not so much dense in terms of population as ours, approximately 1.5 million people were eliminated. In the bottle, it's huge amount and terrible slaughter that took approximately one big battle, maybe lasting 3 days altogether. And Carthage disappeared. But if you look upon the Carthage and Rome, on the rim of Mediterranean, there was not enough space for such two superpowers. And what Cato observed in Carthage was the second Rome that had the same goals and tried to pursue these goals on the same geographical territory, mainly in Spain. And today, on the Pacific Rim, there is no place for such big two superpowers as China and the United States. The question is,
which one is Carthage and which one is Rome?
Which one is Carthage? Which one prevails? In our terms, America is Rome.
But when you
but
look from
simply, what can they do if this prediction from Lee Kuan Yew that China is the greatest power that has ever existed in history, which means that you cannot win with China. So the only thing you can do is to eliminate, to delete. If we go for deletion or not, in any way, this will ultimately and probably sooner than later will change the shape of our civilization, because if China prevails, this civilization will no longer exist in the form that we can observe and enjoy. If we delete China, it's a genocide that had never happened in human history, and we will never claim again that we are a Christian society. It's not going to happen. But technically, and in geopolitical terms, there is this threat that this, because we have the clash of civilizations with Islam, and you can observe it in the Middle East, in Europe, where people of Islam are invited and they are more and more aggressive.
London and Paris.
London, Paris, in Milan, in Spain. But with China, it will be the war of the world. And if you want to understand how the war of the world looks like, you should see the final scenes of this motion picture by Spielberg. So this tells what can the potential conflict against China look like. And this is a very important question that Lee Kuan Yew addresses to the United States. You have to be ready to do something reasonable with this fact that you are no longer the greatest superpower on the world, and you will be facing this fact stronger and stronger day after day, because China has been developing very rapidly, but of course, even in terms of economics, you cannot maintain this pace of economic development all day long. But in historical perspective, they are exercising in a natural way their power more and more, and they have much more potential, especially that nowadays this game between the states and societies is based on intellectual potential of the citizens. And as long as we had 800 million illiterate peasants living in China, it was a different story. But now, when we have 300,000 engineers educated each year in the United States and 1.5 million engineers educated each year in China, it's a question of one generation where more inventions will be produced in China when they develop the technology faster than the United States that used to lead in technological development.
And also a lot of Chinese people outside of China, which still identify as Chinese. This also is something.
This is another issue, another story, because this is an intentional program that is triggered by Xi Jinping, where he educates kids in primary and secondary schools, and there is some credo that they say that only the China is a civilization, all other nations are not. But you can only be born Chinese. But if you are born Chinese, you have to follow and obey the Chinese state. And it says Chinese state, not the Chinese People's Republic. So it's more general.
Definitely the approach of young Chinese.
Very nationalistic.
Yeah, definitely the approach of the young Chinese people right now is very different than the generation before, who marched into the Tiananmen Square with a copy of Statue of Liberty.
Tiananmen was an attempt.
This new generation wouldn't do it. They don't even have an urge to do it because they're trading their freedom for
because they have this lesson that you have your freedom in terms of economy, but not politics. Yes. But they accept it. And this is one of the very interesting facts that, and something that probably United States or the experts are not fully aware of, that China is not the new Soviet Union. When you escape from Soviet Union, you were never coming back. Why every year, hundred thousands or even millions of the best educated and wealthiest Chinese travel to the West. They also send their kids to study in Western universities, but they all go back to China. They don't have to. They are not forced. Simply, they have so good conditions in economic terms, and they are so much patriotic in our terms, in our terminology, that they are coming back. They don't think of a permanent emigration. We have a huge part of our history is based on this emigration, and the United States itself is a country formed by emigration. But Chinese are not thinking about immigration from China. It's no longer this form of government that we had in the Soviet Union. They produced so much opportunities to develop for their citizens, to prosper, to educate, to visit the world, and to come back safely, until the moment you are touching the political sphere.
Or you're Uyghur, or you live in Hong Kong.
You're not Chinese then. Because this is very national state. This is also something that the West is forgetting, that the nation is the basis of, the nation is the biggest form of population that you can identify with. So you can identify with your family, with your tribe, with your country, but not with the civilization. And China is the civilization, but as it is said that this is civilization that pretends to be a state. And this is very wise, because you cannot identify yourself with the entire civilization, but you will identify yourself with the state. This is, of course, a sphere
of a huge dispute.
So this is very reasonable.
This is a sphere of
very intentional
of dispute, because many sinologists would say that it was not always the whole one China. In the history, there was a lot of times when there were many Chinese states. There's no one united Chinese language.
But now they are construing something new. And they are very effective. And they are doing this intentionally.
They are. But we don't know how many protests are actually there, and we don't know how far this unification goes, because whenever as you pressure too much, and right now they are pressuring, for example, Canton and Guangdong and Cantonese, people speaking Cantonese very strongly, deleting Cantonese from, for example, from TikTok. And there is a huge protest against that, because there is their language, not Mandarin. And we talk about millions of people and not thousands. Those tensions in China themselves are very, very strong, and those are tensions truly between millions of people. How far this
hoping for
unification
ascension
goes
might be very much delusional.
and how far the new policy of Xi Jinping, how far it's going to take China, we really don't know. This is an open question, but the tensions are strong.
But what we can see that China is taken more and more seriously. They're playing more and more important role on the global scale.
And they
so it's a question if we are driving towards separation of civilizations or collaboration between civilizations. And we are in a moment of history that is not decided. That's why we have this turmoil in the West, but what is happening now in the West is that the West is forgetting its roots, and this is very dangerous for this form of civilization. And surprisingly, they can see this from the Asian perspective. If you read Nakamura, who is the father of Japanese geopolitics, he starts off with this observation that the root of all the might of the West lies in Christianity. So this is obvious for them. And in the West, we are observing that Christianity and this form of civilization is attacked very strongly. But the thing is that you cannot declare another form of civilization. It was a long-term ongoing historical process, very unique. And when this ancient world collapsed, there was a Christianity that managed to take over. And took over.
To have a punchline of this discussion, but absolutely.
But today we don't see any other similar form that our civilization may be transformed into.
Funny thing.
Consequently, it may collapse or under external pressure on itself. And we have two strong civilizations, which are by no means better, but they are there. Arabic one, so Islam, and the Chinese one. And Arabs say that dying camel is asking for many knives. It's attracting many knives. So they see us as a dying camel. They are coming with their knives. This is obvious to any reasonable person who has common sense
with this
at place.
This is a dark view, but of course it's important to see all the threats. The Christianity has this wonderful power that it takes over hearts of the people, not only in the West but all over the world.
This is true, and
the biggest
what is
playground right now for Christianity and the most new baby Christians are in China.
What is underestimated that Christianity is the religion for bad times, for difficult and hard times, and it proves in hard times. So maybe we can still hope for Christianity, but we have never been in such a moment in history, probably since the clash between Rome and Carthage.
And this was the punchline of Common Sense Generation, the clash between Rome and Carthage, China and US. Which one is which? This is for you to decide. We of course encourage you to read more about this topic and write down the comment under this video. And thank you very much for watching Common Sense Generation. And I thank Polish National Foundation for making this video podcast possible. This is Common Sense Generation. Common Sense Generation.